Have you ever found yourself kind of stuck, like going around and around with the same philosophical questions,
Oh, yeah.
like trying to get at something really basic about reality or how we know things?
Mm-hmm.
And it makes you wonder if maybe there's a totally different way to look at it, like a
Yeah.
whole other approach that we're just not seeing.
Absolutely. And that's actually what we're diving into today.
Okay.
It's a totally different perspective.
Yeah.
It's Japanese Zen Buddhist philosophy.
Okay.
And we're using this awesome entry from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy.
Nice.
So it's not just about, learning some new facts about a different tradition. It's about encountering this really powerful way of thinking
Yeah.
that often goes against our usual intuitions,
Right.
especially about the very questions that drive philosophical thought.
Exactly. We're not just giving a history lesson here. We're
Right.
on a mission to really pull out the philosophical heart of Zen,
Yeah.
to see how it wrestles with these big questions. And we want to make it easier to understand this really rich tradition,
Yeah.
one that puts a lot of emphasis on actually doing things and having direct experiences,
Right.
which honestly might strike you at first as kind of
Yeah.
almost anti-philosophical.
Yeah, the entry actually uses that term anti-philosophical.
Right.
And that's what makes it so fascinating, I think, for anyone who loves philosophy.
Yeah.
Because Zen kind of sidesteps those usual Western philosophical frameworks,
Okay.
but it gives us these deep insights,
Yeah.
like about what knowledge really is,
Yeah.
the limits of thinking in dualities,
Okay.
and even the nature of reality itself.
So some aha moments, for sure.
Yeah, definitely some aha moments, even maybe some challenges to the assumptions we usually take for granted.
I'm ready. Let's jump in.
All right, let's do it.
So we hear the word Zen all the time, but what's the philosophical weight behind it?
Right. What are we actually talking about?
Yeah.
So the Stanford Encyclopedia entry starts by clarifying that Zen comes from the Japanese pronunciation of the Chinese word chan,
Okay.
which itself comes from the Sanskrit word piyana.
Okay.
And dhyana means meditation.
Interesting.
So right from the start, meditation is not just some technique.
Yeah.
It's really the core of how Zen approaches everything.
Okay.
And it's directly tied to how the historical Buddha reached enlightenment.
So this isn't about just like clearing your head for a few minutes.
No.
Meditation is really the foundation of how Zen understands things.
Absolutely, that's exactly it.
Okay.
And the ultimate goal in Zen is to perfect what's called prajnaparamita,
Okay.
which is a kind of wisdom that doesn't discriminate or make distinctions.
Got it.
And you don't get there by just thinking about things.
Okay.
It comes from a really deep understanding that you cultivate through meditation.
Okay.
Zen sees just theoretical knowledge as kind of limited,
Okay.
like a language game that gets caught up in making distinctions, and ultimately doesn't really free us from suffering.
So that's a challenge to a lot of traditional philosophy,
It is.
where reason and argument are so important.
Mhm.
Zen is saying that real understanding goes beyond just the intellect.
Yeah, that's right.
And the entry mentions Zazen as a key practice.
Yes.
So for a philosopher, what's the big deal about Zazen?
So Zazen literally means sitting meditation,
Okay.
and it's the foundation for every school of Zen.
Right.
The point isn't just to relax or chill out.
Okay.
It's to develop a state of being where you can embody that non-discriminating wisdom.
I see.
And that experiential understanding
Okay.
is often called satori,
Okay.
which is basically a moment when you realize that all things are fundamentally equal,
Right.
free from all of our usual biases and distinctions.
I see.
And Zen wants this wisdom to infuse everything we do.
Yeah.
Not just our meditation, but how we interact with ourselves, others, the whole world around us.
It sounds like Zen is saying that our everyday way of thinking is a big obstacle. The entry calls it the either-or ego-logical dualistic paradigm.
Right.
A lot of philosophy critiques that kind of binary thinking, too.
Yeah, exactly. Zen argues that this dualistic way of thinking,
Yeah.
with its tendencies toward conflict, stress, and anxiety,
Right.
needs to be overcome.
Okay.
And they're after this holistic, non-dualistic perspective
Right.
that lets us engage with the real world with a mind that's both still and completely open.
Interesting.
And it's rooted in what they call our Buddha nature,
Okay.
which is our potential to become enlightened.
I see.
So it's in us already.
Okay, so we come to this really provocative idea.
Yeah.
The entry says that Zen can be seen as anti-philosophy.
Mm.
For someone who is really into philosophy, that's a little startling.
It is a strong statement for sure.
What does it mean exactly in this context?
Well, think about what we usually mean by philosophy, especially in the West.
Yeah.
It often relies on reason.
Okay.
It's an intellectual effort to understand human nature and reality,
Right.
starting with the idea of the self and using logic and reasoning as the main tools.
Yeah.
So if you think about figures like Descartes or Kant or Hegel,
Right.
they all, in their own way, placed a lot of importance on the thinking subject
Mm-hmm.
as the starting point for understanding.
So the focus is on rational inquiry
Yes.
and the self as the reference point for knowledge.
That's it, exactly. And Zen is different.
Okay. How?
Zen is kind of suspicious of starting with our everyday observations
Okay.
and then trying to refine them just through reason.
Okay.
It suggests that if our initial perceptions and even the way we reason
Yeah.
are already based on flawed, dualistic ideas,
Right.
then we might be stuck in a vicious circle.
I see.
So instead, Zen says that discursive reason alone
Hmm.
can't fully grasp the totality of reality.
They use that phrase in Toto, don't they?
Yes, they do.
Okay, so it's not that Zen completely rejects thinking,
No, not at all.
but it sees limits to what reason alone can do in
No.
terms of ultimate understanding.
Yeah, Zen is after a kind of insight that goes beyond the confines of our normal way of thinking.
Okay.
You know, all those dualistic and ego-driven thought patterns.
Right. Right.
And this brings us to a core concept in Zen,
Okay.
the idea of not two.
Okay, so overcoming dualism through not two.
Exactly.
It sounds so simple.
It does.
Almost like something we already know,
Right.
but I bet there's more to it than meets the eye.
For a philosopher, there are definitely layers of meaning here.
Okay, so what's the philosophical punch of not two?
Well, Zen really emphasizes getting past dualistic thinking
Okay.
because they see it as a root cause of our suffering
Okay.
and why we misunderstand reality.
I see.
So this either-or logic that dominates so much of our thinking,
Yeah.
it creates these artificial divisions
Okay.
and oppositions.
Right.
Two
Mm-hmm.
is the central idea used to dismantle that whole framework.
So logically, what is not two actually negating?
Logically, not two negates the act of dividing a whole into two separate independent parts. But it's super important to understand that it doesn't then say that everything is just one big blob either.
Okay, so not a monolith either.
No, it's described as a positionless position.
A positionless position.
Yeah, meaning it avoids both the dualistic view and the simplistic non-dualistic view.
Okay.
It's not about clinging to a single undifferentiated whole.
Right.
It's more like this dynamic and fluid movement that goes beyond those fixed categories.
So how does this positionless position of not two affect how we understand knowledge?
Okay, so in terms of epistemology,
Epistemology.
Zen critiques how Western thought often creates a strict separation between subject and object,
Right.
the knower and the thing being known,
Yeah.
whether it's the external world or our own inner states.
Right.
And this oppositional way of thinking
Okay.
really limits our understanding,
Okay.
especially when we try to grasp realities that go beyond what we can observe with our senses
Okay.
and the limits of our self-consciousness.
So not two challenges this.
It proposes a practical project that you achieve through meditation, aiming for a direct experience of oneness
Okay.
that includes the physical,
Yep.
the subtle, and what they call somatic unity.
What's that?
It's like a deep meditative absorption.
So it's not just arguing for interconnectedness, theoretically, but actually experiencing it.
Exactly. Not two says you can't solidify two things as being fundamentally separate and individually real.
Right.
And that highlights how interconnected everything is.
Yeah.
There's a great Zen saying that captures this.
Okay.
Heaven and earth share the same root, and the myriad things are one body.
Wow.
It's a call for a totally different way of seeing the world.
A holistic view.
Yeah, a holistic view.
So what's the target of that negation and not two?
The main target is the idea of a separate independent I, the ego.
Okay.
Zen says that this sense of a fixed and solid self is what leads to dualistic thinking.
Right.
And this negation isn't mainly a logical thing.
Okay.
It's an existential uprooting of ego consciousness that you achieve through practice.
Right.
Like the entry says, just trying to logically negate the I can get really messy.
Yeah.
It can lead to endless loops or paradoxes.
So it's a fundamental shift in how we experience ourselves
Yeah.
and our relationship to the world. It's
Exactly.
not just a change in our ideas.
Right.
And this transformation, as we touched on earlier,
Yeah.
involves experiential understanding through concepts like no thought and no image.
Right.
To be honest, for a philosopher who's used to clear concepts,
I understand.
that sounds kind of vague.
Yeah, it can seem that way from a purely conceptual point of view.
Right.
No thought and no image. Or munen mushu in Japanese
Okay.
are definitely central to understanding what not to means on an experiential level.
Right.
But these terms can't be understood using our usual logic of either or.
Okay.
They're pointing to a lived experience that goes beyond the limitations of oppositional thinking.
So what kind of experience is it?
Yeah.
Is it just having no thoughts or mental images?
Not exactly. It's not like being unconscious or having a blank mind.
Got it.
Zen also uses the concept of no or mu in Japanese.
Right.
Or nothing.
Okay.
And there's a famous story about this.
Okay.
It's about Joshu's answer to the question
Okay.
of whether a dog has Buddha nature.
Okay.
And his answer was simply no.
Just no.
Yeah, and this is interesting because in Mahayana Buddhism, the main idea is that all beings have Buddha nature.
So his no isn't a straight denial of that.
Exactly. It's pointing to something beyond those simple categories.
Of yes or no.
Right.
It's going beyond the usual affirmation and negation.
Exactly. Joshu's no goes beyond just being and non-being.
Right.
It points to the very ground from which the idea of Buddha nature arises.
Interesting.
It means absolutely nothing,
Okay.
in the sense that it's going beyond relative nothingness.
Okay.
It goes beyond the limits of our usual concepts.
The entry mentions the cone tradition.
Right.
And how this no by Joshu is used to challenge students to think outside the box.
Right.
To think beyond logic.
So a Zen master might give this kind to students
Okay.
and ask them to give an answer that's not just yes,
Right.
no both, or neither.
Okay.
Those are the four possibilities in what's called a tetralemma.
Okay.
They're being pushed to respond from a deeper level of understanding.
A preconceptual level.
Yes, exactly.
So how do you arrive at that kind of response?
That's the challenge, isn't it?
Yeah, because it's like being asked to think without thinking.
Yeah. And there's a Zen master Day
Okay.
who told his students not to try to grasp Joshu's nothing
Okay.
by using their intellect.
Right.
Or logic or physical action.
Okay.
Or verbal explanations
Oh.
or even metaphysical speculation.
Okay.
Is that mobilize your whole being,
Wow.
your whole personhood,
Yeah.
to really dig into the ground of your own existence.
So it's a very personal journey.
It is very personal and existential.
Okay, so what's the result of this deep personal exploration?
It's the realization where the meaning of nothing becomes clear. And this is often called seeing into one's nature,
Okay.
or kensho in Japanese,
Okay.
or an initial satori experience.
Okay.
It's described as a state of deep stillness and clarity during meditation,
Right.
where the constant chatter of the ego temporarily quiets down.
Interesting.
And Dugan, who was a key figure in Zen,
Okay.
described this experience as dropping off the body and the mind.
Dropping off the body and the mind.
Yeah, Shinjin Datsuraku in Japanese.
Okay.
And it means that the usual separation between subject and object, self and other, dissolves.
That's a radical idea.
It is.
It really shows how different this is from our usual sense of self.
Yeah.
So the entry then looks at Zen's perspective on time and space.
Yes.
I'm guessing that's also pretty different from how we normally understand them.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Zen's understanding of time and space comes from these concepts
Okay.
that sound paradoxical.
Emotion and stillness in motion.
Motion and stillness.
Yeah.
Stillness and motion. Seichi no du and duchu no sei in Japanese.
Okay.
And you can't really explain them using those simple opposites of active and passive.
Right, right.
Instead, they come from the experience of emptiness in meditation,
Okay.
shunyata, or ku.
Okay, so motion and stillness in motion. For a philosopher who's trained to think logically
Right.
and make clear distinctions, those sound like contradictions.
I know it can seem that way.
Yeah.
But think about a spinning top.
Okay.
The body of the top is constantly moving,
Right.
but the central axis looks perfectly still.
Okay.
And that gives us a little glimpse into the nature of shunyata,
Okay.
where these seemingly opposite states can exist together.
Interesting.
So in the context of time and space,
Okay.
stillness is associated with zero time and zero space,
Okay.
which is a state before we make those distinctions of time and space.
Right.
And then motion represents how our normal experience of time and space arises.
So emptiness isn't just nothingness in a negative way. It's the ground from which our experience of time and space comes.
Yes, exactly. And Zen
Hmm?
also emphasizes how time and space can't be separated.
Okay.
It's like an integrated space-time that you experience within Shunyata.
Okay.
A single moment can actually be seen as containing all of time,
Wow.
and a single point in space can hold all of space.
Okay.
Kind of like a hologram,
Right.
where every piece reflects the whole.
Mm.
So the way we usually separate time and space
Yeah.
is really just a mental construct.
Okay.
It's how our dualistic minds try to understand reality.
Right. And there's that Zen saying, show one's original face before one's parents were born,
Yes.
which seems to be about this preconceptual realm.
Yes. It points to a dimension of experience that comes before that subject-object split,
Okay.
before our normal ideas of space and time.
I see.
In this state of zero time and zero space, there's no difference between past, present, and future,
Right.
or between the whole and its parts.
So how does this relate to Zen's focus on the here and now?
That's a good question.
Because it seems contradictory to talk about a timeless, spaceless realm
Right.
and then emphasize the present moment.
It's an important point.
Yeah.
The here and now in Zen
Okay.
can be understood as like a fragmented experience of this integrated space-time.
Okay.
It's what happens because of our dualistic way of seeing things.
Right.
We experience the world through the lens of the present moment
Yeah.
and our immediate surroundings.
Right.
But from the non-dualistic view,
Okay.
the now actually holds all of time, and the here encompasses all of space.
So the present moment isn't just a fleeting instant.
No, it's not.
It has this depth and all-encompassing quality
It
that
just-
we usually miss.
Yeah, that we usually miss.
And Dugan had this concept of being time.
Yes, Uji.
Right.
And it illustrates how being and time-space are inseparable.
Okay.
It's a concrete lived experience of space and time
Right.
that's not filtered through intellectual concepts.
I see.
Zen sees time and space as dynamic,
Okay.
alive and totally interconnected,
Okay.
not static containers that you can measure.
Right.
Dugan's phrase, the bird flies the sky, and the sky flies the bird.
I like that one.
It really captures that dynamic interdependence
Yeah.
of what we normally see as separate things.
Okay, so we've looked at not two
Yeah.
and this unique view of time and space.
Mhm.
But the entry also talks about not one
Right.
and returning to the everyday world.
Yeah.
What's the philosophical meaning of that?
Okay, so Zen doesn't just stop at realizing not two.
Okay.
It emphasizes coming back to the everyday world,
Okay.
to all the multiplicity of things.
Right.
But now, informed by what you've learned,
Okay.
this is the move towards not one.
Okay, not one.
And it's a dynamic process. It goes back and forth between not two and not one,
Right.
often symbolized by a circle,
Interesting.
representing wholeness.
So the goal isn't to stay in some kind of detached meditative state
Mhm.
forever.
No. The ideal Zen person
Uh,
is someone who can embody not two
yeah.
in their everyday life,
Yeah.
in all their interactions and actions.
Yeah.
The entry uses this great example
Okay.
of Ungan and Jugo making tea.
Okay.
Ungan's simple act of serving tea to someone who wants it
Right.
is an example of this trans-individual qua the individual.
Okay.
It's someone who's seen the interconnectedness of reality,
Okay.
but still acts appropriately in the everyday world.
So it's about integrating these insights
Yeah.
into our everyday life.
Yeah, into those seemingly mundane moments.
And this brings us to the idea of Zen freedom.
Right, Judo.
Yeah, how does Zen understand freedom?
So Zen freedom, or Juyu,
Right.
is described as action that arises out of self on its own.
Okay.
And it has this spontaneity like you see in nature.
Right.
And this is different from a lot of Western ideas about freedom.
Yeah, how so?
Well, Western ideas often focus on being free from external constraints.
Okay.
But in Zen, because the self is understood as this groundless ground,
Yeah.
this nothingness,
Mm-hmm.
Zen freedom isn't driven by ego desires.
I see.
It comes from a deeper, unconditioned place.
So it's freedom from the limitations of the ego.
Exactly.
And that allows for this spontaneous and authentic way of being.
Yes, and there's this great saying by Baso,
Okay.
the mind as it is the way.
Interesting.
Heishin Kore Michi in Japanese.
Okay.
And it's not talking about just any mind,
Right.
but a mind that's been cleansed
Okay.
and is free from rigid intentions.
Right.
It's a mind that can act spontaneously but wisely.
I see.
within the flow of life.
And this freedom even shows up in how we move physically.
Yeah.
The entry mentions stillness and motion again.
It does, and Kakwan's concept of immovable wisdom explains this so well.
Okay.
It describes a mind that's always moving,
Yeah.
but remains centered and still,
Okay.
like a mirror that reflects everything
Right.
without holding on to any particular reflection.
Yeah, that's a good one.
And this freedom of movement, stillness and motion, is developed through mind-body training, which Takuan calls body's learning.
Okay, body's learning.
It's where the body moves smoothly and responds naturally,
Right.
without needing constant conscious control.
So it's like being fully absorbed in what you're doing.
Yes.
Where thought and action are completely integrated.
That's a great way to put it. Zen calls this samadhi at play.
Samadhi at play. I like that.
It's a kind of action that comes from total immersion in whatever you're doing.
So Zen freedom is something you can achieve
It is.
that affects everything you do.
Yeah. And it can lead to a life with more contentment and a lot less stress.
Wow, this has been such a fascinating look at Zen Buddhist philosophy.
It has been.
It definitely offers a radical alternative
It does.
to many of the assumptions in traditional Western thought.
Yeah.
So just to recap some of the key takeaways for our listeners.
Okay.
We've seen how Zen critiques a purely rational and ego-centered approach to knowledge,
Yeah.
but it offers these deep insights into going beyond dualistic thinking.
Right. Through the experience of not two, we looked at its unique perspective on time and space,
Yeah.
rooted in the meditative experience of emptiness, and connected to the immediacy of the here and now.
Right.
And finally, we talked about the Zen person
Yeah.
and what true freedom means as this spontaneous, egoless action that's integrated into everyday life
Exactly.
through the dynamic back and forth between not two and not one.
The practical and experiential side of Zen philosophy
Yeah.
is a powerful contrast to purely theoretical approaches.
It makes us rethink how much we can rely on intellectual analysis
It does.
to understand the deepest parts of ourselves and reality. It shows that direct lived experience can give us perspectives
Yeah.
that we might miss if we only use reason.
So for our listeners who are into philosophy,
Yeah.
think about this.
Okay.
If our usual philosophical frameworks are built on dualistic distinctions,
Right.
what limitations might we be placing on our understanding?
Of things like consciousness, reality, and the nature of being.
Right.
Could this Zen emphasis on direct, non-conceptual experience
Yeah.
be a valuable addition to how we do philosophy?
It's definitely something to think about.
It is. And if this deep dive has made you more curious,
Yeah.
we encourage you to check out that Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy entry
Okay.
on Japanese Zen Buddhist philosophy.
Right.
And you might also want to explore some of the translated texts by those Zen masters
Yeah.
that are mentioned in the bibliography.
Good idea. There's a whole world of thought and practice waiting.
Yeah.
For anyone who wants to explore further.